So g'day everyone, thank you for coming along tonight. I want to thank Kirk for those nice words and the previous ones we've done, care seminars. Hopefully were helpful to some people. It's kind of hard, every subject we've picked has been such an enormous topic that it's very hard to do it justice even in a couple of sessions on a Sunday night. So this is the third care seminar I've had the privilege of speaking at, and I'm grateful to the chance to do it. Just to be clear, I say this every time, but these are not sort of master classes like I'm getting up here. You could probably get up here and do just as, say just as many things, probably a lot better than I can. But my goal is to hopefully open up fresh ways of thinking for you about real life issues. So I'd rather you probably have your own ideas about conflict, for you to use what I'm saying as a sounding board and for you to reason with me in your own mind and to think about this important topic. I don't want it to be some sort of pop psychology self-help talk. It's not a TED talk at all. And tonight I won't be focusing so much on conflict resolution skills. If you want to know what those are, I mean, honestly, I would Google it if I were you. I Googled, I put in an AI thing before this. I said, what are the best ways to resolve conflict in one of those AI things online? It came up with really amazing stuff, but it was all pretty obvious. Listen carefully, pace yourself, speak clearly and organise your thoughts. And it was all fairly obvious stuff. If you want to know about all that, certainly there are lots of resources available to you. Today, while we will talk about action steps and real world things, we'll be more talking about dispositional approaches and a few practical things that you can do, but we won't be focusing in on reflective listening skills and things like that. So just to let you know. So if there's nothing new for you tonight, I'm sorry about that, but hopefully you'll hear something that reminds you of something that's true, that you know, and then you can go and live in the light of that truth. If you do hear something new that's helpful, then that's even better, isn't it? So we're thinking about conflict and handling conflict. And I want to ask, I always like to start by saying, well, get a definition going. Let's get something we can work with here. What is conflict? I want to put up on the screen there what I'm hearing when we think about conflict. And by conflict, I mean a significant disagreement between two or more people, which often takes place over time, involving some kind of incompatibility or difference in desires or preferences, often accompanied by strong emotional tension. So that's a really big chunky definition. I don't know if it's the right one. You can have any definition you want. But what I'm trying to say is conflict is not usually a 20-second thing where you say a few unhelpful things and it's over. That's not really what I mean by conflict. Conflict is not a slight disagreement over which Taylor Swift song is the best one. Again, that's not really conflict. That's not what we're talking about. Conflict, as I understand it, is usually more serious. It takes or lasts longer. It has some substantial points of tension between the people who are involved. Those points of tension often relate to differences in personality or desires and intentions, and all of the associated feelings and emotions that come along with that. So there's a definition, take it or leave it. But to think about the subject, we're going to break tonight up into two sessions, and then we'll have a bit of a break in between the two. So the first one is we're going to lay some groundwork, understand conflict a little bit more, and then we're going to look in session 2 at handling conflict. Perhaps we could say handling conflict better. So maybe understanding conflict more biblically, and session 2, handling conflict better. We're going to start though by reading the Bible. We've got a couple of readings tonight which we might bounce off a little bit as we go. Before we hear the reading, I'm just going to pray, if that's all right. Great God, God of goodness and grace and peace, we come to you tonight because we want to honour you in how we think and feel and how we live, and especially how we approach this enormous topic of conflict. And so help us, by the power of your Holy Spirit, to achieve a little more clarity tonight. Help us to think more clearly and biblically about conflict for your glory, for the good of your people, and for the good of the world. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So our first reading comes from the book of James. Again, a bit of a sounding board for us tonight. James chapter 4, first 12 verses. And LJ's going to read that for us. Thanks. You can come on up, mate. If you don't mind, you pop your Bible down.
Okay. James 1 to 4, 1 to 12.
Sorry.
What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit he has caused to dwell in us? But he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but shows favour to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister, or judges them, speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbour?
All right, thanks for that. Okay, so what I want to do as we move into our first session is I've got 6 quick points. They'll come up on the screen if you want to get the slides later. I was originally going to have Bible verses on to accompany all these points, but I had trouble pasting it in. I couldn't get the PowerPoint to work. There was something going on there. But we do have dot points. So you're familiar with those from church. So in keeping with that tradition, but I've got 6 of them in this first session. And I want to understand conflict better through a biblical lens if we can. So, because if we don't want to approach conflict in the manner in which God indicates, then we're moving into unhelpful territory. The God of truth says things to human beings to assist them, to help them, and so they can live properly in the world. And if we ignore those things, then, well, we're deviating from the truth, from wisdom. And so God's ways are the best. So what does God say? Well, the first point I want to say, which is already there, and is probably the most obvious one, you didn't come here tonight for me to tell you this, but conflict is in the Bible. There's no point in thinking biblically about conflict if the Bible doesn't say anything about it. And so it needs to be said from the very beginning, the topic of conflict is something which we find regularly in the Bible. In fact, the Bible is really one big long story with conflict as a central theme. We see this kind of titanic struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan, between angels and demons, between light and darkness. We also see in the Bible how our spiritual disconnectedness from God plays out in our relationship with Him and with each other. And so in the Bible story we find precisely what we find in our own lives. We find a world filled with people who are denying and disobeying and disregarding their Creator. A world of people who want to be their own gods, their own bosses. And what that means is, if I'm God, if I think I'm a little God, if I see myself that way, and you think the same, we're going to have some trouble, aren't we? Because who's going to be right? Well, I am, aren't I? Because I'm me. And you're going to think the same. We're going to have conflict. We're going to have totally different ideas about things. So we shouldn't be surprised when conflict becomes part of our lives. If the Bible is filled with conflict and the world is filled with conflict and history is filled with conflict, we're going to have some conflict in our lives. We shouldn't be shocked when we're struggling to get on with someone. We shouldn't be surprised if there's some weird tension between us and someone else. It's just going to happen, unfortunately. Now, the Bible presents conflict on a number of different levels. There's the spiritual conflict. You would have seen that in the Bible quite a lot. There are military and political conflicts that we see in the Bible. There is internal and psychological conflict. And then there is the interpersonal conflict. And of course, that's what we're talking about tonight. That's what you've seen in our definition. Conflict between people. I'm suggesting usually between two people or smaller groups of people, maybe families or in smaller scale, things like that, where the tension, the emotion, and the differences of desire in a situation begin to build up. Like it said in our reading from James chapter 4 verse 1, it says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you?" People do battle with each other because there are battles inside. There's turmoil inside. So conflict often happens when my attitudes and my hurts and my life experiences come into contact with your attitudes and your hurts and your life experiences. You bring those two things together and there's every likelihood we're going to have some concerns. So it's kind of like conflict happens when I want things to be one way and you want it to be some other way. I said something and you didn't like it, and I said something in response and you thought I should apologise for that, and I shouldn't apologise for that because you're being too sensitive. It's all that kind of stuff. Interpersonal conflict. So the Bible is, among other things, a long story of conflict, firstly on a cosmic scale, but it also touches on every part of life. And for that reason, we shouldn't be surprised when conflict comes our way. But if God is in control, like we keep saying he is, then we can know that there's a purpose in it. So the second point I want to offer you is that while conflict will certainly come your way at some point, it's actually an opportunity to grow. We're all on this sort of journey of personal and spiritual growth in which God is working. And conflict is a part of that journey. Conflict can actually force us to grow up, force us to face up to issues instead of avoiding them all the time, force us to stand up for ourselves. It can force us to learn to forgive and do the right thing even when we certainly don't feel like doing it. It can help us to pray more and to trust God more. It can help us to realise that, hey, guess what? Other people have really different ideas to me. And so again, from the book of James, we're encouraged like this. Back in chapter 1, it says this. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." And what that means is difficulties like conflict test us and they show us us. And that testing is a part of how God refines us. He challenges us to grow. And so as we become more mature over time by going through these things, that newfound maturity and experience and wisdom will then help us face more challenges and more difficulties. It's important to keep growing throughout life because when you get older, you're going to need that maturity. Just trust me. You'll understand when you get there if you're younger. Keep growing. So growth and personal transformation is the lifelong calling of the Christian. And when conflict and difficulty comes along, God doesn't say, well, let's put pause on that, we'll do the growing later on once we get past this. No, that's not how it works. God uses everything to make that growth happen. Like Paul says in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, a verse I'm sure many of you know, he says, "We know that in all things," count those things, all of them, "God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And then Paul goes on to explain what that purpose is, and that is to make you more like Christ. Not so much to have a nice, easy, happy life, although it's good if you do. Not so much to have a nice, happy family or lots of money, although it's nice if you do. To make you more like his Son. And so God has a purpose in everything, even conflict. It's about changing us, it's about humbling us and growing us and making us like Christ. Conflict is hard, but that's how all growing up is. Conflict is not pointless. It's an opportunity to grow in some way. And yet, while that's true, we are people who are called to live peacefully. We know conflict will come. We know that good things can come from it. But we don't just go out looking for conflict just for the sake of it. You know, it's not Fight Club, all right? We don't want to stir up things unnecessarily. We serve Jesus, who in the Bible is called the Prince of Peace. The Prince of Peace. So if God in his grace has made peace with you through Jesus, if he's actually forgiven all those sins of yours and all your failings and all your inconsistencies and contradictions, then we should do our best to get along with people. If that's how God has treated us. It's all through the Bible, isn't it? Again, I'm going to read a couple of things here from James. It says things like, wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving and considerate and submissive and full of mercy. It says, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Importantly, in Romans chapter 12, which will be our main reading in the second session, he starts chapter 12 with these words. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And then he goes on and gives all these instructions, right? We'll see it a little bit later when we read it. But then he gets to this point. He says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So God has shown his mercy to you. You didn't earn that. You didn't deserve it. But he has established peace between you and him. And so we should then do our best, in view of that mercy, to live at peace with others. As far as it depends on you, he says, live at peace with everyone. And we know this is true all right through the Bible. I mean, it often speaks about things we should avoid so that we don't have unnecessary conflict. It says things about, don't be needlessly argumentative. Don't be a quarrelsome person. Don't be impatient. Don't be easily offended. It says things like this from the from Proverbs, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. It's saying try to have gentle answers if you can. It says things like love keeps no record of wrongs from 1 Corinthians. Jesus himself said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And so our response to God as saved sinners is to be humble and grateful and to do the best we can to live at peace with other people. That's going to involve forgiving, trying to be gentle, as far as it depends on us. Yes, conflict will happen. Yes, God has a purpose, but God calls us to pursue peace as much as possible. That's not a suggestion. That's not my idea. That's God's idea, and it's a calling to strive for peace with people. So that's the third foundational point. We've got a fourth one, of course, and that is it's not easy to do. It's not easy to resolve conflict. We wouldn't be here otherwise, would we? We wouldn't have a night like this if it was all, tickety-boo and easy to work out. Sometimes you can pray, you can agonise over what to say, you can exercise self-control, you can get advice, you can read your Bible, you can phrase your words immaculately. You can do everything possible to sort out a conflict, and it doesn't work. Not every discussion, not every argument will reach a resolution point where both of the parties just feel fine about it. And I reckon, sometimes it's okay simply to agree to disagree. I think that's part of maturity. Not every single human on the planet is going to agree with you on everything. That's just how we're wired, and I think that's okay. And you can still learn to love that person even though they don't agree with you. Maybe you need to be a little creative, but you can find ways to move forward in a healthy direction that isn't marked by bitterness and anger. Because if you let bitterness and anger take hold, it's going to be very hard to escape that if they become habits. An example in the book of Acts of this not resolving things from the Bible, Paul and Barnabas had a disagreement over whether to send John Mark on their second missionary journey. They had a big powwow about it and things became a little, conflicted. It says this, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, and he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So Paul and his mate Barnabas actually had a very seriously falling out to the point where they said, well, you go that way, I'm going this way. They both had different ideas, different desires about a situation. They couldn't really resolve it, so what did they do? Well, they didn't change their beliefs about God. They didn't walk away from the church. They remained determined to proclaim Jesus. And as far as we can tell, they didn't throw chairs, they didn't throw punches. They moved on, still as brothers in the Lord, but committed to doing good in different directions. And I think there's a clue there. Sometimes when you reach a stalemate and you've tried, but you just can't clear up this conflict, there's still this weirdness about it. It's really helpful to be ready to peacefully focus on the good that's in front of you. Not every conflict can, end in a fairy tale ending. If you've really done everything you can do to bring peace, but you haven't made that progress, maybe what you need to do is say, well, here we are. I'm going to pray for that person. I'm going to continue to love them as best I can. And I'm going to peacefully move on to focus on what's good to do next. Not just step away from serving the Lord and just shut down. Okay, that didn't fully resolve, but I'm still going to keep following Christ. I'm still going to keep moving forward and see what God brings my way. I think that's important. Sometimes conflict doesn't fully resolve, but it's not the end of the story. A fifth point is, I want to stress this. I don't have a lot of verses for this one, it's just a quick point. While some conflict is not going to find an easy resolution, I want to remember that conflict is not the same as abuse. Abuse is abuse. So abuse, I think as I define it at least, is the mistreatment of a person which causes harm and distress to them, which deeply affects them in a negative way, and it's something that could have been avoided. It's something that someone does to another person, either directly or by deliberate omission of action, which harms them and negatively affects them, and it could have been otherwise. Now, I'm not sure what definition you use, but our time together tonight is not about abuse. But I wanted to just throw this point in here just because if you're being abused, or if you know someone is being abused, I don't want to define that as conflict. That's not just some sort of parting of the ways, a bit of a disagreement. It's a different thing altogether. There might be conflict involved and touching on that abuse, but abuse is really in a category of its own, and you don't deserve abuse. And I hope there's some way you can get out of it, if that's something that's in your life. But conflict is one thing, abuse is another. And so if I say anything tonight about forgiving and moving towards the person and all that, I want to really just put a huge caveat in there and say I'm not directly addressing abuse. Abuse would have to be another night, and you'd have to have someone more qualified to be speaking to you about that, all right? But abuse requires specific action, and that's not what is in view tonight as we talk about the general concept of conflict. I hope that's okay. I hope that's clear, all right? And if you are a person who is suffering abuse of some sort, I hope you're able to connect with someone who can maybe help with you and help you quietly and support you to see what you can do moving forward. So I want to move to my sixth and main point in this session, and that is conflict between people is a conflict between sinners. And I think Kirk mentioned that before. We're all beautiful but broken in God's eyes. We are flawed and frail. And for that reason, much of the conflict we experience comes from what we might call our heart problems. From the heart. In the Bible, the heart is the centre of the person. It's the key part of a person. In Proverbs 4:23 it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Or another translation says, for it is the wellspring of life. And it stands to reason that what's going on in our hearts is often at the heart of how we handle life and conflict. And so sometimes we seek our own desires to the exclusion of the needs of others. Sometimes we're emotional and sensitive. We take things too personally. Sometimes we don't think holistically and empathetically about another person. We react to them. And these reactions, these responses come from our hearts. Now, we don't really have time tonight to look at it, but I reckon in the book of James, if you read it very carefully, he does talk a lot about heart motivations and why people do what they do, and particularly why people sin in the way they do. I reckon if you read it, you can discern 4 heart motivations that cause conflict to rise up. And you can see them listed there. In our hearts, we want comfort, we want approval, success, and power. Now, there's other things that could be said, but they're the 4 that I think I can glean from the book of James that are applicable to tonight. I want to step through those 4 things really quickly, just so you see how they're sort of relevant. So, firstly, our hearts desire comfort and ease. Do you really want your life to be harder than what it needs to be? I've never met anyone like that, except maybe a couple of adrenaline junkies who do crazy things, jumping off things, or gym people. I mean, the people that are there all the time and they're going crazy with the weights and they're just stressing their bodies, right? I mean, it's fine if you go to the gym, but most people like comfort at ease. We don't want it to be harder than it needs to be because life is hard on its own. And we desire deep down things to just work out easily as possible. And if you're making it harder for me, if you're not fitting in with my desires, my schedules, if you're not agreeing with my interpretation of events, then my heart isn't going to like that because you're now introducing an obstacle, you're making it harder for me. Our hearts want a sense of things being comfortable and as easy as possible. And if people around me aren't making that happen, then we might just have a little bit of conflict on our hands. I'll give you an example. Someone comes home from work, let's say a married couple, no kids, but they come home from work and the partner's there and they're coming home and they are hoping when they get home from work, they've had a big day, that the house is tidy, that dinner's in the oven, you walk in and smell it, it's going to be so great. You know, what a way to end the day. I've had a big day, but it's all going to be all right because I'm going home, everything's going to be sorted. Nothing wrong with that. And you walk in and nothing's done. There's nothing in the oven, it's not on, nothing's been bought from Woolies, and your desire for things to just be easy and comfortable are gone. What's the feelings that come up? Well, you know, it's just not a very nice feeling. There's a good chance that there'll be a bit of huffing and puffing and sighing and cupboards getting closed a little harder than they need to be. That's a heart issue. Our hearts desire comfort and ease. That's one of the things that lays at the heart of conflict sometimes. Well, what about the second thing? Our hearts desire approval. We desire to feel justified and accepted in our words and actions and attitudes. No one wants to feel wrong, do they? When someone makes you feel wrong about something, you don't go, oh, thanks so much. It's just not a nice feeling. Or to be rejected. I need to feel like I'm right. Like I'm accepted or acceptable. You ever notice when you're in a conflict with people, with a person, that you're the one who's right and they're wrong? That's just a standard, isn't it, for conflicts? We wouldn't be having the conflict if I thought you were right. Well, maybe we would even, but you know what I mean? Like it's just, I think I'm right and you're wrong, and that's all there is to it. And guess what? You think I'm wrong and you're right, and we go from there. Sometimes we expect people who are very different from us to affirm our perspective. We have no rational basis to think that they've just got to automatically do that. And when they see things differently, if they're not affirming me and say, oh, that's great, honey, fantastic, I love how you did that, you know, then we might have some concerns on our hands. Our hearts want approval, and we're not getting approved, we're not feeling justified. Well, that's a hard issue behind conflict. Let's go to that third one, success. This is linked to the previous 2 points, but this idea that I've got a plan, I want things to work out and to go the way I've planned them to be. We think about how we'd like them to treat us, how we'd like our life to turn out. We want life to be really nice and have money and great holidays and a happy family. And if you get down the road and you find out the happy family hasn't transpired and the holidays, we couldn't really afford those, and you go home and sit down in your chair and you can hear the clock ticking and you're thinking, well, this is my life. We want success, we want things to work out, but sometimes our personal visions for how it's meant to go just simply don't transpire. And if you're not helping me get my goals, well, then my heart isn't going to like that. And that's another heart issue. And finally, the fourth one there, a heart's desire, power. I don't mean like a Dr. Evil, sort of evil overlord, laughing, stroking a cat sort of power with a big black leather chair dominating the world power. I just mean a really strong sense that you've got it under control. You've got your world around you under control. I think we want that. That's why in conflicts people seek the higher ground, the moral ground, the higher ground. They're very happy to point out the other person's inconsistencies and mistakes and say all manner of things to position themselves slightly above them. That's a position of power, of advantage. The problem with getting the high ground is it's pretty lonely up there. It's very lonely up on the high moral ground. Nothing wrong with being honest and explaining your perspective. There's nothing wrong with asking a person good questions and noticing sin and foolishness and even talking about those things. But we need to watch out for this desire for power, because that'll drive us to say things more strongly than we need to. That'll make you perhaps even distort the truth and reword things. You ever notice that if you've ever been in a bit of a tiff with someone, you put on the voice, oh, you said, but things just get distorted. Why do we do that? We'll do anything to get some advantage. We make it very personal when sometimes it just doesn't need to be made personal. We can be very manipulative, both men and women. So conflict is a heart issue and it affects the whole person in so many subtle ways we can't even keep track of it. I'm just giving you those four just as a little taster of some of the ways that what our hearts do as we come to a situation and what causes conflict and what makes it hard to resolve. Deep down we want comfort, we want approval, we want some kind of success, we want power. And so when two people engage in conflict, we need to remember that there are two hearts with two sets of needs and vulnerabilities and weaknesses. That person you're in conflict with has their own story. It's filled with painful experiences, things from the past, things that sometimes affect our present life. Their past is bearing down on them as they face the conflict too. So conflict is a heart issue, and that heart has been affected by what they have experienced in the past. And I reckon that's really important to remember, because it tells you where some of the sensitive and difficult relational tension points might be. It's important to remember that person's heart has been through a storm. I'm not saying they're justified in everything they do, but it's important to remember. The past affects how you process things today, the hurts. I don't know what it was, but we'll get into that a little bit more in the next session. I have a really quick story and then a couple of wrap-up points and we'll have a bit of a break. It's a story about me. It doesn't reflect well on me, but I've never been shy about saying uncomplimentary things about myself, and I'm sure some people enjoy that anyway. So a story about me, and it was a mini conflict, but it was a pattern. My kids, when they were younger, I'm a busy pastor, I've got things to do, I'm stressed. I'm working probably close between 70 and 80 hours a week. There's a lot on. I remember one day I got up and there was, all I could focus on was all the things I had to do. And there are a lot of things. And then when the kids are going to primary school, they're getting ready for school, one of them, and I won't say which one, there's only two of them, so you could guess which one, but one of them mucked up and just got really stroppy and started yelling and then crying and whatever. And there I was. Now, I wasn't really focused. I wasn't taking the kids to school, but I thought, here I come. All right, Papa Bear's here. I'm going to resolve this situation quick, smart. And I came in with some pretty heavy words. I'm 6 foot, and the kids were primary school kids. It's not easy, not that hard, to have some influence over them. Now, I didn't smack the kids at this time. It wasn't about that. It was just that I came in and I handled the situation, and I handled it too heavily. I didn't say anything like swear words or anything like that. It wasn't quite like that, but I just really went over the top, way in excess of what was needed to resolve the situation. I didn't really need to resolve it. The kids were going to go to school by hook or by crook anyway. Then the next day I actually talked to a fella who was a counsellor, experienced counsellor, and I told him what happened. He asked me a really good question. He basically cut me down to about an inch tall. He said, when you raised your voice and was being direct and assertive, whatever you want to call it, to your child, was that about them and what they'd done? Was that really about you? And I was silent. He said, was that just you just getting it off your chest, a bit of stressed, and you just needed to wail on someone because they weren't fitting in with your plans and you're feeling overwhelmed and they need to shut up? And I said, you're totally right. It was all about me. I could have quite easily said, hey guys, let's cut it down, let's keep it quiet. That's not what I did. I'm just telling you that not because I'm proud of it or it's funny. I'm just telling you our hearts do weird things. But those kinds of things come out of our hearts. And there are all sorts of motivations and weaknesses and so forth. And I'm sure that's connected to things that I experienced when I was a kid. That you can be seen but not heard. You make too much noise, shut your trap. And there I am doing the same thing. I'm not blaming my past, I have to take responsibility. But I hope you can see some of these things we're talking about. I'm not understanding the situation. I'm not trying to understand it from my child's perspective, whatever it might be. Not thinking about it. But it came out of my heart. The weaknesses, the hurts, the foolishness, the sin, whatever it was. And so I just want to summarise before we head to the break. We've had these 6 foundational points I sort of wanted to start with, and then in the next session we're going to get to the handling conflict better. And that is, we've talked about conflict is in the Bible. It's a story of conflict about how what's happened in our rebellion against God has affected the whole world and our lives. 2, conflict is an opportunity to grow, that God actually uses everything in our lives to grow us, to make us more like Jesus as we follow him. 3, we're called to live peacefully with people as far as possible, as far as it depends on us. Number 4, sometimes conflict doesn't resolve. It just try to commit to doing the next best thing and see where you go. Number 5, conflict and abuse are not the same. Abuse requires special focus and support. But number 6, conflict is a heart issue affecting the whole person. And there are certain key touch points with the past that affect our heart when we're in real life situations. And so that's all I have for now. I thought we might have a quick break and then I want to tear into the next session. All right, so in this second session we want to just think about handling conflict better. And so we've laid some foundations. I've basically offered you some ideas for you to think, and maybe those things, we can develop those a little bit more now. But this is tricky because every situation that wherein conflict occurs is unique. Every situation has its own context and nuances, and obviously the people involved are different. So I'm not a conflict guru, but I also want to make sure that you know these aren't watertight solutions, but we'll do our best to look for some good biblical things we can do. So I want to offer 5 possible action steps to handle or prepare for interpersonal conflict better. So they'll come up on the screen, hopefully in a similar manner to before. I don't know. Yes, all right. So there we go. So first one, before, during or after conflict, It's good to reflect on what you are bringing to the conflict. So I want to suggest that we all need a little bit of self-examination. So it's really hard to control what other people say and do. And you don't always know for sure what their motives are or thoughts. You might think you do, but you don't know for sure. But you do have access to your own thoughts and your own feelings. And that might be a really good place to start. Self-understanding is key, I think, to taking the best and wisest approach to conflict. It's good to ask yourself, what part am I playing in this? It's natural to go, and just think about the other person. But hang on, what part am I playing? What hard issues am I sort of dealing with? In that example I just gave you, the one I'm not proud of, but a truthful one, I had to ask myself, what was going on inside of me when I did that? And in what other ways do I do that? I could have benefited from a little bit more self-reflection. Asking questions like, what are my weaknesses? What are my insecurities? What trauma have I been through in the past? The 1,000 different stresses and events in the past have an effect on us. And the way we were raised especially has an effect on us and the way we handle things now. So if you were mistreated when you were young, you might struggle to trust people later on. You're going to be maybe a little bit more suspicious of other people's motives, a little cautious around them, because you want to keep yourself safe. If you were made to feel worthless when you were young, you might turn into a people pleaser. Just want to be a person that gives in and says yes to everything because you can't stand up for yourself. If your childhood was just generally unstable, you might want to keep things the same. You might be a person who's resistant to change. So when someone says, I don't like this, let's do that, you might react to that. So all I'm saying really is your upbringing, your key life experiences will play a part in how you respond to stress and conflict and the differences you have. It links to a point we were making earlier. There are these contact points. And so present conflicts open up those contact points of the past and you get triggered. And that's something worth reflecting on. It's not easy to do that. We don't naturally sit around and go, let me think about myself really deeply for a moment. But ask yourself, if you had to write down 5 of the most difficult things in your life, 5 things that you still remember that have left an impression on you, what would they be? I'm not talking about the nice things, I'm talking about the most difficult things, because often it is the most difficult things that will shape you, particularly in, sometimes negative ways. If you had to write a list of 5 things, what would they be? And then could you answer the question, how do those things affect me now? It's helpful to know because our responses to conflict have to do with those things in many times. Our responses have their own inner logic. So if ever you've been in an argument or a conflict with someone, you'll know that your responses feel correct to you. And you'll know that the way they act feels incorrect. It feels weird. It doesn't feel like it's quite matching up. So we all view life and the world differently. We all have our own weak points and sin. And some of that has to do with our negative experiences from the past, our habits of the way we react, and it all comes from the heart. So what I'm saying is it's just good to work on being a little bit self-aware, to sort of remember the way you've been impacted. And maybe you can just be a little bit forewarned about what might trigger you, what might not be helpful for you, what situation to not get into. We always think that conflict is the other person's fault, but I think it's helpful to start by thinking about ourselves as we go into conflict situations. I think that's a part of taking responsibility for the part that we play in conflict. And so a good first step towards handling conflict better is to examine yourself. Be aware of what's important to you, and that's okay to have things that are important to you. Be aware of what triggers you. There will be things that are those contact points with the past. So that's the first point. And so while we're thinking about the value of being reflective, point 2 is to engage in thoughtful reflection on the gospel. Point 2 is to remember the gospel. because you're probably going to forget that. You're going to get busy, and you're going to get crabby, and you're going to be tired. You're going to forget the glorious good news of Jesus. It's good to reflect on that. Remember, we just had in our reading, Paul says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. What's he talking about? He's talking about the gospel. He's talking about what God has done for us. And so the life of the Christian is one of daily responding to God's mercy to us. We are to live, even in the face of conflict, in view of God's mercy. So if I find myself being irritated, which seems to happen more than I'd like, if I find myself about to get really angry at someone, or if I'm tempted to say something a little unhelpful, I need to remember the gospel, which tells me I'm a sinner just like that other person. Even if I'm right, I'm not better than them. I'm not more valuable than they are. And so when it comes to God, we're all sinners in need of grace. I am, you are, and so is that person you're struggling to get on with. So a little bit of humility goes a long way when it comes to handling conflict better. A bit of humility, gospel humility. I'm not on the high ground and you're down there. We're two equal humans trying to work something out. The gospel says it's a level playing field before the throne of God. And so reflection on the gospel, I guess, is to bring us to that point of humility so we can approach conflict in a slightly more balanced way. But I think reflection on the gospel also, I think it seems to me, should bring a sense of personal security that will help stabilise you in conflict. I think that's what the gospel brings, and I hope you've found that to be true. You think about it. I think about it for myself. If I've been shown mercy, if I'm at peace with the creator of the universe, the actual God, I'm going to live for eternity. Like my body will cease to work at some point, but I'm never going to not exist. I'm never going to die. If God is with me and for me and He's growing me through life, it's all a gift. I can't earn it, and that means that I can't just, have a bad day and lose it if I have a bit of a rough day. It's all a gift that comes through Jesus, and it's all free. Then I can see that as a stable basis for analysing how I respond to conflict. I can ask myself, if I really am secure and loved in Christ for all eternity, why do I feel so unsettled? What issue has hijacked my heart to the point where I don't rest in the arms of Jesus? To what extent am I upset simply because that person or that issue, I just want them to conform to my ideas? How is this not all about just my insecurity and ego? And even if this issue was never resolved, how does Christ's love for me give me strength to go on? Reflection on the glorious gospel of peace will help humble us and secure us when we approach conflict. Like any storm, you need to be planted on a firm foundation. The roots of your tree need to go deep into the soil of the gospel. Deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I reckon reflection on the gospel will help us to forgive the other person when they've offended us, because we've been forgiven for offending God. The third thing to remember when facing interpersonal conflict is to try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Love your neighbour as yourself. Do to others as you'd have them do to you. Try to think about their needs and their situation. Now, that's not always easy to do, because when the emotions are rising and you're feeling irritated by what's happening and you can't believe they said that, you're not going to be hugely interested in their needs. That's just how it goes sometimes. But it can help, I think, to try very hard to think more deeply about this person as a person, not as a thing to overcome, but as a real person, to look in their face and see a little bit of you staring back. See, again, everyone is different. Our past affects us, how we process the present. We're all frail sinners in need of God's mercy. And if that's true, then it applies to everyone you're ever in conflict with. They have their own unique story, their own weaknesses and strengths. It says in 1 Peter, he says in chapter 3, verse 8, finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. So everyone has a story that they're in the middle of, and everyone has hurts and weaknesses like you do and I do. If that's the case, when you come into conflict, it's worth remembering that, to be a little bit sympathetic with this other person, because they're in the storm just like you are. They might be acting like a goose, but they're a fallen sinner just like you. So I think it's just not easy to do. It's worth thinking about the other person and their situation and needs. I'm just trying to think of an example, but a person who was abused when they were young, just emotionally and mentally abused by a parental figure. And then I remember talking to that person and coming into a bit of tension in our discussion. And it did occur to me that this person has been through things I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It just made me think, you know what? I just need to be a little bit careful. It's as simple as that sometimes. It's not a magic fix, but if you get insights into that person, you might just see their humanity a little more clearly. It might help you word things a little more helpfully. It might help you with the tone instead of doing the voice. It might help you remember that this issue isn't worth having World War III over. You're just not going to live that long enough to have to fight over everything. Some things you're just going to have to take a different approach, I think. And so after reflecting on ourselves, after reflecting on the gospel and on the story and needs of the other person, the fourth aspect to handling conflict better is to ask, what does love look like now? We are commanded to love people. God doesn't ask us, he insists on it. In our Romans reading, we didn't read the middle bit because just in the interest of time, he said in view of God's mercy, he says things like, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honour one another above yourselves, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, he says. What's he talking about? He's talking about love. That's love in work clothes. Do not be proud. Live in harmony with others. And so that means, therefore, that anger and yelling and nasty words and sarcastic comments that are meant to dig and making negative assumptions and being pushy, implying other people are terrible people and they have all these ulterior motives, these things don't usually solve conflicts. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. By all means, go ahead. The next time you have a conflict, employ all those things, the angry words, the yelling, see what happens. It just doesn't work. It just makes things worse. It leaves people more emotionally riled up and brittle. But love and forgiveness and gentleness and self-control are some of the most powerful things we've got in our toolboxes. Incredibly powerful and disarming. While love isn't easy, God will always help us do it. Because what God commands, he also supplies the help to do it. He wouldn't ask you to do it if he wasn't going to help you try to do it. If he wasn't going to be in there working to grow you. So God will help you take baby steps in loving other people, even if it's a really hard issue. And I know we're speaking very generally here. You might be able to think of scenarios where, love the other person, that's going to work. But that's a command. And so as we reflect on handling conflict better, we remember God's mercy and his command to love, that we're to pursue peace as far as it depends on us. And I want to add, loving a person isn't about you being a pushover. Just so we're really clear. Not everything is worth a conflict over, but it is okay to stand up for yourself sometimes. Okay? It's okay to say clearly and carefully what you're thinking. It's okay to have your opinion. It's okay to have your needs and to explain why those are needs that you have. But there just has to be some kind of balance between this emotional, this expression, and then self-control. There needs to be some kind of balance in the mix there. You'll notice Paul often in his letters, because he's so attacked all the time by people, he will regularly state his qualifications and who he is. He will say sometimes, hey, look, I'm an apostle. Hey, sorry, Paul the apostle here. I'm just kind of doing my job. You need to listen to me. He's not being rude or pushy or trying to enter into conflict. He's speaking the truth in love. So it's possible to navigate conflict without you turning into a completely compliant person who gets walked over. And it's possible to navigate conflict without turning it into a cafeteria food fight too. The other person might make it hard for you, but after reflecting, even if you're feeling angry and frustrated and betrayed, keeping your cool is always more productive. And I remember, I was talking again to a counsellor once about things, and he said, Matt, you've got to stop doing stupid stuff. And I said, can you just expand on that a bit? He said, you keep doing things that don't work. Stop doing those things. Try something else. But if you keep doing things that don't work, that's dumb. And that's what he said to me. I'm not telling you you're dumb if you keep trying things, but you can see what he's getting at. Hey, if you're trying to work through something and it's not working, or you're raising your voice and you're pointing the finger and you're poking in the chest, or whatever it might be, the nasty text messages or whatever it could be, if you keep antagonising and pushing and raising the temperature, you probably find it won't work. You'll just push the other person away, or you'll make them more angry. So as we ask ourselves, what does love look like in this situation? It might be actually some direct words. It's okay to be direct with a person as long as you're not trying to exert all this power over them and destroy them. It might take, talking about a subject which is really challenging and just raising it and just going there. It might mean listening more instead of talking. One of my weaknesses, I don't listen. It might mean putting off a conversation until the emotions die down. If you're trying to resolve something with somebody on your phone and their cat just died, now's not the time to send this huge long text about all your emotions and all this. Just wait a few weeks, wait a little while. The situation might require a bit of help as well from people outside. Ask somebody wiser than yourself. If you can't avoid conflicts, then at least try to have the healthiest conflict you can have. It's about speaking the truth in love and seeking to let God's mercy and love shape your responses. But remember the love bit. And then the fifth and final point, as we're thinking about this, handling conflict better, and that is, after all this reflecting, the time will come where you might pull a plan together, pray about it, and then try it out. Explore the possible options for moving forward, even if these involve some kind of godly compromise on your side, even if these include giving a little bit more than what you'd like in terms of a compromise. But try to implement a solution and then evaluate to see if it went anywhere. Don't be like me and just do all the things that don't work and keep not working, and then you keep trying them, they don't work. You might even have to get some outside help. But if nothing seems to work, then go back to step one and keep reflecting and praying and trusting God. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say, and anything that's worthwhile in life is probably going to be hard. If you've noticed that. Marriage, raising children, developing a career, managing your money, looking after your health. Almost anything that is worth something is going to be hard and it's going to take time. So keep doing what you can do to live at peace with everyone, as far as it depends on you. So you can't solve all your issues and conflicts on the first go sometimes, but sometimes they will drag on. Some of those conflicts will hang in midair and sort of fade. And some may never be resolved, at least not in this life, not on this side of heaven. But to handle conflict better, I just offer to you those 5 points. Take them as they are, take them in the spirit in which they're given. First, instead of focusing on the other person, start with self-examination and your story and how these things are impacting you and your touch points with the hurts from the past. Number 2, engage in thoughtful reflection on the gospel. How does God's mercy humble you and make you feel secure? Number 3, consider the other person's situation and needs. You're not superior to them. They have their own story and hurts, and if you want to work through something with them, knowing where their pressure points are might help you approach it a little more carefully. Hope that makes sense. Number 4, ask, what does love look like now? Whether it's giving them space, being a little bit more direct, or thinking how to most helpfully word your response to them. Speaking the truth in love requires a lot of effort and thought. And finally, make a plan, pray, and try it out. At some point, you're going to have to try something if you want to resolve a conflict. You can't just sit there and reflect and muse over it. At some point, you're going to have to say some words or type some words or give a gift or do something to try to resolve it. You're going to have to try. Put a humble, loving plan in place, give it a go, and see what happens. Maybe you'll navigate the conflict and you'll resolve it and you'll go, yes. Maybe you'll have the conflict and while you don't agree, you've actually managed to have the conflict without destroying each other, you know? You haven't burnt your bridges, because burning bridges is not always a particularly good idea because it's harder and more expensive to rebuild a bridge. It takes longer. So friends, I hope those 5 points seem okay to you. I hope there's something, I guess, that sparked in your head something that you're thinking, well, I might be good to remember that. All right. Now, because the time is a little short, I'm going to fly through just these last few points. I'm so sorry. This is like drinking out of a fire hose, but pucker up because I've got a couple more points coming your way. So we just had those points about maybe handling conflict better, but it would seem strange if I actually didn't talk about some real world context for this. Just really quickly, work. Since so much of our lives are spent at work, we should expect conflict at work. You spend so much of your life engaged in employment, if that's something you're able to do. We need to remember the Christian is in the Lord's service. As Paul says in Colossians 3, he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as though you're working for the Lord, not men. So Christians should have a good work ethic. And we should also try to develop a good attitude towards our co-workers, even the really prickly, annoying ones. So part of Christian growth is learning to think of ourselves in our work and our work relationships as being part of our service to Christ. And so how we get on with our co-workers is very important and a part of our witness in the world. Conflict with others at work is very hard, and I think most of the things we've just seen tonight apply to work, but it might just be possible or necessary at work to ask a co-worker to come in, or a supervisor, to help you resolve something instead of always sorting it out with them directly, because that might not work at work. Second context is the context of family life, very quickly. We all keep parts of us hidden from other people. Our deepest fears and hurts, our weirdnesses, whatever it might be, they are closed off and private, and none of us really know about them, about the other people tonight. When we are in the presence of other people, we organise our personalities and project ourselves in a way so as to generally make it work reasonably well. But all those more extreme things or strange things or difficult things are not seen, except in the family home. And then, you guys all know what I mean. It's pretty obvious where I'm going with this, but you know that when you get to know a person well enough, you see most of it, if not all of it. Warts and all, I think, is the word that we say, sometimes literally, but there you go. Family life is so personal, it's very hard to navigate, but I reckon the Christian basics in family are important. Things like showing respect, putting love into action, being quick to forgive, just moving forward. And so if you need to resolve conflict at home, I want to suggest 3 things that are really important. These are just my things, I'm just throwing them your way. Conflict at home, stick to the issue. Because when things get heated, you end up going, oh, you did that 2 years ago, and remember that time I wore the blue dress. It can just go all sorts of different ways. We're not talking about the blue. We need to talk about this issue here. Stick to the issue if you can. Watch your tone. Be careful how you speak. And then try to sort out things when the timing is optimal. Sorting out all the world's problems on the way to church is probably not the time to do it in the car. Third context for conflict resolution and conflict is marriage. Marriage takes two to tango, and the Bible says the two people become one flesh, one unit. And so of all the human relationships that you need to maintain if you're married, and you need to foster, if you're married, I want to put to you that the marriage is the most important one. Your marriage to the person that you're with is more important than your relationship with your kids and your parents or anyone else you want to mention. In fact, your marriage will be the foundation from which you then raise your kids well and love your parents and love your friends. I want to put that to you. I don't know if you agree with that, but I think that's certainly what the Bible suggests. The marriage is the centre of the family home, and if there happen to be kids there, then the marriage needs to be maintained and prioritised by both people. The husband has to be careful to love and listen to his wife. Not that I know anything about that, but the wife needs to be careful to respect her husband, and that's a biblical command. Husbands need to take responsibility and not switch off and distance themselves from what's going on in the home and in the marriage. And the wife needs to show some receptivity to the husband when she can see the lights turning on. Okay, so just some thoughts. If you're having a lot of conflict in your marriage, get help. It's not magic, but try to work through it. Do your best. As far as it depends on you, do what you can do. I can't offer you more than that now. Finally, context number 4 is church. We heard this morning in that extremely helpful sermon that church is a family. It's a dynamic, diverse family, and like any family, there are going to be things to work through. If you've been in churches long enough, you know the huffing and puffing and selective socialising and all sorts of things that go on. If real tension and conflict is emerging, if you've been wronged, Jesus says that you need to go directly to that person and say, look, I think I need to talk something through with you and see if this rings a bell and see if you can resolve it. I would only suggest you do that with bigger ticket items. Don't come up to me on Sunday and say, oh, the other day you looked at me a bit funny and I just want to say I forgive you. Because I'm going to go, well, I look at everyone funny. What are you talking about? You're just going to annoy a person, telling them you forgive them for something they didn't even know they did, and it's probably not a big deal. I'm talking about more of the big ticket items, the things that really rock you personally. Those things are definitely worth resolving because they have such negative potential for consequences later. So here's my suggestion in church in terms of conflict and tension. You've got 3 options. Number 1, if someone's wronged you or there's an issue, you can cover it. You know, in 1 Corinthians 13, love covers over a multitude of sins. I think that's 1 Corinthians 13. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I have to look that up. 1 Peter, I beg your pardon. Thank you. There we go. Love covers over a multitude of sins. What that means is that if you love somebody, you'll go, yeah, and you'll just forgive them and go, yep, just let that one go through to the keeper. Forgive the person, let it go, move on, because it's better for them and for you anyway. So cover, or you can confront in the manner that I just said, which Jesus suggests. Go to the person and say, hey, look, I don't want to be that guy, but I just want to point out, you said this and that really hurt me because I just love you, I respect you. And I don't know if you noticed that or not or whatever. I just don't want there to be weirdness between us. So you've got cover, forgive, confront, or I want to suggest consult. If nothing works, then ask a growth group leader, ask a friend at church, what do you think I should do? Ask one of the elders or pastors. Cover, confront, or consult. Conflict in the church is hard. There are things you can try as far as it depends on you. So that's it. So I've given you a lot of ideas and information. I suppose I just want to quickly just wrap a few things up and then we're done. Managing conflict requires skill and commitment because all of life does. Conflict and managing it is just like anything else in life. You've got to think about it, you've got to get a bit of a plan, you've got to try to develop skills and stretch yourself. Getting along with people you disagree with requires determination, it requires effort, the development of personal characteristics like self-awareness and kindness and empathy and self-control. Those things don't just fall out of the sky and land on your lap. You've got to grow and develop those through time. Good relationships also include the skills, like the ability to listen actively, not, oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, and not really listen, but actually listen actively. Communicating effectively and clearly. Again, these things don't just appear by magic. You don't just open your mouth and this wonderful language flows out that, that never creates any problems. You just got to work at it. But if you want to manage conflict a little bit better, you can. You can. So in a nutshell, it has to do with reflecting on yourself and the other person. It has to do with seeking peace as far as it depends on you. It has to do with remembering God's love and forgiveness and letting that shape your responses and making you humble and secure. And at all times, being humbled and strengthened by the good news of God's grace and letting that help you no matter what the result is. So friends, as we close, whatever happens, I hope you do continue to grow as a Christian, as a person, and that you will learn how to handle conflict a little bit better as the years roll on. Most of all, I hope that as that happens, God will get glorified. Thank you.